Good afternoon. It is for me a real pleasure to be here. Only in the previous one we were talking, and with Horacio and with Hernan we remembered things that have happened throughout these years. And they had the deference of making me very nice gifts. One is the first commercial chronicler. The second gift is my first note in the commercial chronicler. Thus, this was also very interesting, and the most interesting thing is that they gave me the cover of December 10th, 24, where precisely devastating the lid. He said we were facing a crisis, and the way in which we were going to face it was making a tremendous adjustment. Well, I told the truth, but for me it is a huge pleasure every time I have been able to participate in this event. I have done, and I will try to continue doing it, because I feel at home and I feel among friends. So, more than anything, I want to thank him for inviting me again, and the only thing he has changed is only the role, but let's say, friendship is still the same as always, and that is worth a lot more, because we were friends of before. Now it is easy to have friends, but at that time not. So thanks Horacio, thanks Hernan, and thanks to all the commercial chronicler for such generosity for me. Today I want to talk about what I understand by leadership, quality that I had to learn quite very fast and late in my life. An accelerated course, we could say, because when I undertook it is crossed by the ideas of freedom, did not imagine, much less sought the presidency of the nation as a possible outcome. I have told this sometimes. We were at the end of 2018 in New York City celebrating that my dear friend the Professor was launched to politics. And then in a moment comes Professor Alberto Banegas Lynch's son, our maximum hero of the ideas of freedom, takes me to the side and tells me, "But you are not going to get into this. Look, that we need it in the cultural battle." I told him, "I do not teach or fart. Therefore I ask you, either ask me what my sister is going to do, because if I don't know me, imagine with my sister. With Adorni either, because I don't know either, it depends on Adorni." But basically it was the people who chose that I am where I am and who I owe myself. It was a decision of the people. The circumstances took me. They are not as romantic as people believe, because basically I was a victim of a persecution during the previous government, and that was basically limiting my income, and that is why I had to start looking for other horizons, and I realized that the only way, let's say, face politicians is to get into the sand in politics. Many times I say that when one is going to see a match in Argentina, it is very nice. The stands are very beautiful, the songs are very nice, everything is very nice. But no matter how strong you shout, the ball does not move. The ball is there in the middle, it does not move. The only way to go and dispute these satraps is to put on the short ones, the booties, go and kick. Well, we seem that we have kicked quite strong, and we made a few goals and ended in the presidency. But returning to the central axis, for many years in our country, from the educational and cultural establishment, managed by the political caste, a fantasy and sectarian definition of what a leader represents was disseminated, reinforcing a concept that is not closely resembled with the truth. For them, leaders are those who give grandiloquent speeches to the masses, in which mythological heroes fall every so often from the Olympus to give a bicycle to a boy in a villa, where they do not even have asphalt to enjoy it. I propose that we adopt another definition. The good leader is not the one that makes great works by others, but is the one that inspires others to fend for himself. It is a totally opposite definition, which makes enough sense. We are sunk and contaminated from more than 100 years of socialism in different variants and different furs, but that everything always leads there, and therefore, this is a definition more in line with our liberal creed. In this context, the leader appears before the adversity to guide the rest and show them of what they are capable. And this does not apply only to presidents and the leaders of the political forces. They can also be found in companies trying to make a project successful, in soccer teams that seek to ascend, or in hospitals during emergency surgery. I put the case of the ascent because, as my friend Horacio Riggi is from Chacarita, so it was to motivate him a little and so that he does not get depressed. But well, what is clear, I will not be talking about all these examples. You have hundreds of examples much better than I can give. But there is something that did make clear politics, is that the ways of letting are no longer the same as 20 and 40 or 100 years ago. It was proven in the last election, where a candidate without a device or his own party managed to impose himself before the obstacles of an exclusive system designed to self-preserve, where he also showed the professionals of politics and leadership, those who did things as they had allegedly done, all of them failed. Moreover, they had some candidates who were the perfect candidate of what the manual had to be, said. The two ended very badly. I will not expand more because if the dark part of the speech begins, I will try to avoid it. I will try to make it more color. Not only did it happen during the election, today we are rewriting the way in which it is governed. We are even implementing an unpublished economic policy. In fact, if we consider that Argentina had fiscal deficit of 113 of the last 123 years, it is more not only that, the 10 years that had no deficit we were in default. I remember that when we said we were going to zero deficit, they said, those that were softer, that we were crazy, but at least they said it was impossible, that it could not be adjusted more than a point per year. And the reality is that after so much scourge and torture that has been the fiscal policy in Argentina, after 123 years it will be the first year that we have fiscal balance in the financial line, that is to say, tax balance of truth. And that said that it could not be done, and we did it. In the first month of management we had put the accounts in order. They said it was not sustainable, they said a lot of things. However, here we are, and that is why the 3,000 country risk today is 750, and the dollar that was in 1300 when we assumed today broke 1100, and practically the gap is almost nil. So, to come and continue saying that there are impossible things, because what we are doing is to demonstrate that what they say is impossible we can do. But we must not be confused, because we are not really inventing gunpowder. We are simply recovering the forgotten truths that made us successful in the past. That is the only way that leads us to a future worthy of being lived. As I said, we did things in our own way, or the opposite of what professionals recommended. Because many times doing the right thing requires doing the opposite of what the manual dictates. Starting with the relationship with the truth. It had never happened to win a candidate who said that it was going to be what we announced and effectively did, which is neither more than the greatest adjustment in the history of mankind. If you set our campaign, it was quite clear. It had three axes. The first axis had to exterminate inflation, and for that we talked about making a tax adjustment, of going to zero deficit. We talked about eliminating the central bank, and today the sanitation we made of the central bank puts us much closer to that goal than what we were originally. In fact, the currency competition today exists. You can make transactions in the currency you want. Moreover, we also eliminate the fourth fiscal one. So in consolidated terms we made an adjustment of 15 points from GDP. But we not only said that, we also said that we were going to end insecurity. And everyone said it was impossible. For example, ending the pickets, and just what we did was to end the pickets. We said that we were going to end the managers of poverty with the intermediaries, and we also ended with them. And we also said that we were going to fight from drug trafficking, and we are defeating him in Rosario in a truly incredible way. And the third axis of the campaign was our international alignment. We said that we were going to lift the values of the West, and that was why we were going to align with the United States and Israel. And it is clear that today, if something is very clear to the world, it is what we are stopped. The warm positions were over, and it is clear that every time we have to do something we do this. Policy online. Obviously, errors may occur, but those errors in 30 minutes are remedied. Everyone understood what I meant. But nevertheless, politics always worked at the service of itself. They always did things thinking about the next election or how to accumulate more and more powerful by leaving the right side. But a point came where the perverse system broke. The house of cards that was the model of the present state fell by its own weight, and the lies stopped working. You know us and know that we do not say one thing and we do the opposite, nor do we erase with the elbow what we write with your hand. For us this cause is more important than our own life, and we are sure that at the end of the day doing the right thing is what will take us to fruition. We have 4 years to do what citizens entrusted us. There is no time to lose. People can't wait any longer. That is why we are fighting daily to solve the most problems that we can in the present. I say these things, I want to compliment them if it does not bother them, because if I see that they begin to yawn, I modify, but I go to, so that they are not as something abstract. I will tell some applied cases of things that happen to me that I think they can be useful. One of the most wonderful things that happened to me by reading economy books is having read some documents by Professor Juan Carlos de Pablo when he speaks of the economy as a decision-making process, and there I learned the strength that the decision-making process of the one who is handling the levers is understanding. So, I wanted to bring some cases that I think they can be very useful. For example, Back 1 has a phase, separate in 3 phases. One is what has to do with the campaign. We were the first time in the history of humanity that someone said during the campaign to adjust. That is, we said that we were going to adjust. Unlike the others who did not define what they were going to do, we had defined our entire program, but in a very specific way. In fact, we had said how far we were going to cut and everything. And in that there was never the story that someone won a choice saying that he was going to adjust, but as a compliment to this, we said we preferred an uncomfortable truth before a comfortable lie. So, we were clear that what we said was not a pleasant or whatever, or it was not something conventional for the policy manual, but we were confident that if we won we had mandate. That is, we had told people truth, and therefore that gave us a tool that others have not had. Because we told people what they were going to do, and if they still chose them, okay. We are also willing to fulfill it. It was incredible that we arrived saying this kind of thing, but at the same time when it was on December 10th and we had to make the speech, we also told the truth to the people. We said the same thing we had been saying in the campaign, and we told them the problem we faced, and how we believed we had to solve it. And that I think is what gave us credit to carry out the task we launched throughout this year. And that also the results are clearly seen, because when we assume in December, wholesale inflation was 54% monthly and with a lot of bombs that I will not put to describe now, and the last wholesale inflation was 1.2%, that is, we went from a rate that announces the 17,000 to one that runs to 14. And, at the same time, we also knew that it was going to be hard, that it was going to be complicated, because it was going to be difficult to gain credibility very quickly, and therefore, short-term the adjustment was going to have an activity impact. But that activity was touched in April, and today, when they take the numbers from April to today, the economy has been growing at a rate of more or less than 10%. I do not know why that is called Nike's Pipita. For me it is a tilde, but it is not a problem of personal appreciation. Unless Nike is changing the logo, and we did not know, we did not find out. But at the same time, if you take the last annualized data that shows an economy moving at a rate of 14%, and if you take the destationalized EMAE, the latest observations are already above December. This means that when the year ends we will have not lost anything in the field of activity, and we managed to collapse inflation. I say, it must be. That is why on December 10th I will join with Thomas S. Sargent, because we have avoided hyperinflation and has not had costs practically in terms of economic activity or employment, and the wages went from $300 to $1,100, and the poverty that came to play in a peak in the month of January 57% today is in the order of 46%. Therefore, we also did it by lowering poverty, yes, and taking out many homeless people from such a situation, with which doing things very truly pays. What does not pay is to do the thing that criminals of traditional politics do. On the other hand, there is something that I also want to tell you. It seems to me that they are two very interesting things. One was the first day where I meet with all my team, and the truth that were quite complicated days, because for a few weeks we went every day, and every day we had meetings and were quite complicated days. But the first day, one of the things I do is I say what I wanted to do. And then there were a set of professionals who were not directly the ministers, but were participating in the meeting. They say, no, well, but that can't. Then in front of those who told me that you can't, what I told them is that, if I left, I was about 40 degrees and asked the ice cream house for what I wanted to do. I was also going to tell me that you can't. Therefore, I was not interested in hearing, you can't. I wanted them to do what I wanted to do, and the one who was not willing or believed that you cannot, to leave. That is why from that moment I only stayed with my ministers in the meetings. And every time I ask for something they look for a way to do what I want to do. It isn't you can't. We came to do what no one could do, and that's why we are taking the country forward. Another thing that is also very important, and I never imagined that it was so important, unlike the rest of the politicians and the rest of the presidents, I make decisions in front of my ministers, nor consult a focus group, nothing. That is, I make decisions in front of my ministers, and I open them, and I propose my process openly so that they know why I do what I do, or why I decide what I decide. And one of the things that mark me the most is a phrase that says that he does not know what he is looking for, does not understand what he finds. And we are something that we have clear is the course, where we want to take Argentina, where we want to put Argentina. We want to make Argentina big again. We who want Argentina to be the first world power again. We want to recover that place that it had at the end of the 19th century, and for that we decided to embrace the ideas of freedom and move forward without any consideration. And in fact, having 15% of the Chamber of Deputies and 10% of the Senate, we made a reform that is 8 times larger than that made by Menem, which was the largest structural reform in Argentine history. But I want to tell you more about the future. For us it is not enough. It is not enough to have climbed 90 positions in economic freedom. Our goal is to make 3,200 structural reforms more, and that when this mandate ends, to be the freest country in the world. On the other hand, if these things are still abstract, there are two emblematic cases of how we make decisions and how we do what we do. That, incidentally, if it weren't because I am surrounded by hyper-talented people, it would not be possible either. Because I press the buttons, but those of it is as if putting Bilardo, Capello, or who they want, think I am a big man, to direct the Horacio team. It's a joke, I do it because I love him. And there I think there are two very key moments. After the base law came out, the country risk began to fall very strongly and was in 1100. Therefore, with that level of recovery that implied the fall in the interest rate, and obviously, it was going to mean that we were going to enter a very virtuous path, and that obviously that has political consequences. And obviously the opposition, which does not interest him that Argentines are well, but that the only thing that interests them is power for power itself, the power to benefit from the use of power, to enrich themselves, to have things that would not have in normal conditions. We face attempts by the degenerates prosecutors to break the economic program, and very demagogically the same as during the previous government had stolen about 40% to retirees. They were now very concerned about retirees. Then they wanted to apply a formula that directly destroyed public accounts and destroy the fiscal balance. And in that sense, what happened is that the markets felt the impact in 1100 that the country was the country. The degenerates of the prosecutors arrived at 1700. And there I remember that at a conference I was giving, I said that if they voted for some of those characteristics, no matter how much that was going to have a cost of popularity, I was going to veto it. And indeed the degenerates prosecutors advanced, and when they advanced with that, I watched that project, and there were, after defending that veto in Congress, which also publicly appreciated, many deputies, who not yet being our political sign, accompanied us and allowed us to defend that veto. And that implied that the country risk will begin to go down again, and when the irrigation country was going down again, the degenerates with another populist proposal were enraged. The increase to the universities, which actually and raised a false discussion, because the reality is that when you take the impact that caused it in the country and the GDP, the resources that the universities were going to have were exactly the same. In dollars they were exactly GDP, much smaller, with poorer, with more homeless. Because in addition, making the real exchange rate jump, just what he did was amplify poverty. Therefore, it was the gain for a group of criminals against the whole society, and that is why we audits is 60-40 in our favor. And if we go for what we truly proposed, that it was to audit them so that these resources reach those who want to study and do not seep into the criminals of politics, today the consensus is 90-10-10 in favor of us. But we had to have the courage to do it at that time, and we did it because basically we, and the commitment that I have with my ministers is, we get here to be the best government, to make the decisions to be made, and here we don't care that it will happen with the image and all those things. Look, I spoke it, I do not remember with which journalist. I do not remember well if it was with Antonio Laje or with Gabriel Anello that tells me. But in the end, if all politicians end with a bad image, and that is where the file fell to me, I said, look, the truth that if we are all ending with a bad image, well, if we are going to finish how the image, we end with a bad image, to do what you have to do the right thing. And the most incredible that after that I say the country risk continued to go down, it went to levels of 750. And the most incredible thing is that with all this, that today our image, both for what my image is, and what is the image of the management, today is at the highest level, even better than what we had when we assumed. Today the response balance is much larger. But also when you ask people how the situation is today, when we started 85% said we were wrong. Today that number 55. And when we started only 10% of the people believed that we were going to be better the following year, and today that number is already close to 60. That is, doing what had to be done, telling the truth to the people, something that was totally opposed to what the policy manual recommended. We are taking the country forward and we hope to have a truly wonderful 2025. So if there is something that I can convey to you, it is that there is nothing better than telling the truth to the people for hard, and if they allow me something that already very specific of this task that touches me, because the other thing is because you do these things, if that breaks with the manual of the policy, and I think that the best example I have given it, sometimes I made it public, it was when I first went to the 5th of olive trees. And then, at one point we were walking through the halls of the 5th for one of the streets in the 5th, so the former president told me that he felt like an auctioneer showing the house to the new owner. I told him, no, I don't be wrong, I am not the new owner. I am the new tenant for 4 years and with an option to 8, but I am in tenant. Moreover, for me this is like a job. I have a fact, 2 other data that can have fun. I do not use the Rivadavia armchair. That we are really badly called Rivadavia armchair, because it is rock. Originally the Turkey armchair that was from 1921 was used, then it was changed. It changed the rock in 1885, which is the name of Rivadavia armchair. But I don't work there, I work on a table. The other day I uploaded a photo that is the chainsaw in the middle. And when there is a cabinet meeting, do you know what it does? I take the chainsaw to the cabinet meeting so that we do not forget. Because this is very interesting. The other day I make the introduction and I make all the approach where we are standing. Then fortunately all the news is good. All things are good and everything presses that 2025 will be a great year. Then I told them, this is like a football match that they are winning 2-0, it is a danger. The worst we can do now is to sleep in the laurels, therefore to continue working and above all the most chainsaw things. So you know what is coming, which is more chainsaw. But something that is also unpublished in the history of politics. We continue with the zero deficit and with zero emission. That is, it is the first time in the history of humanity that a politician in democracy enters an electoral year and will not do monetary or fiscal policy. Wow, that is new, right? The self-referential part has finished. Now I return to speech. But basically what I am trying to say with all this is that many times the formulas of the professionals fail, and this does not apply only to politics, but to all areas of life. If so, there would be no innovation, there would be no evolution, there would be no change throughout history, because for history to evolve and to break the novelty, there must always be someone who nothing against the current. I say, if they want to see someone who does this systematically, because I have a huge admiration and I have no problem accepting it publicly, it is Mr. Elon Musk, it is fabulous. Every time I can listen to it, because the guy is in another league, that is, it is truly formidable. That is, there must be someone who does what was not yet done, that is, somehow all novelty appears in the first place as a heresy. In fact, one of the things Elon Musk wants is to terrorize Mars. Because you couldn't say colonized, because colonizing is what Columbus did. He wants to terrorize Mars, that is, a guy who is totally out of the parameters. Many of you must have gone from studying at the university models and leadership theory and then going out to the world and ending up doing something completely different. Now, when I say this is not that I am doing apology of ignorance. Because then one would say, well, then we don't study anything. No, for something you study. What is useful is to build abstraction, that is, the exercise of thinking about the problem. Now, believe that you can replicate those solutions anywhere, that is not. That is, what I am saying is, they have what they learned in the manuals also have to modify. That is, in some kind of training it is easier, again more complicated. Those that come from mathematical formations as we usually think of abstract, it becomes simpler, but sometimes the case method only serves to solve specific cases if they are identically the same. But always the interesting thing is to capture the attraction. That is basically what I try to say. In all areas of life who carry out the spear of history, who take the step forward so that others then follow it, are not the ones that follow the leadership manuals, are the ones that Paul Anka said they do it in their own way. They may not know, but the song In My Way is from a man named Paul Anka, who sang a lot of people. Without a doubt who did best, from my point of view, was Mr. Elvis Aaron Presley, but basically the reference is out there. Moreover, when in 1997 Steve Jobs returns to Apple to relaunch his company after more than 10 years of failure, he puts 3 advertising agencies to propose an advertising campaign that reflects the true identity of the company. That campaign was called Think Different, that is, Think Different, Think Different. It was one of the most successful campaigns in the history of advertising and put Apple on the growth path. Jobs said that it is precisely innovation that distinguishes true leaders. This is the message I want to leave today. Never stop innovating, leading new projects, swimming in the opposite direction. It doesn't matter. I do them with a specific case. Do you imagine the amount of things that they told San Martin when he said he was going to cross the Andes? That is, if San Martin had listened to the manuals, he stuck half a turn and left. Do not be afraid to challenge the limits. I am not saying that they do follies, but tell them that you cannot forget. That doesn't count. For the failed, nothing can. If they're all failed. They told me that I was not going to be able to form a game when we started in 2021 and formed a game. They said that the liberals were sympathetic to speak on TV, but we had no votes. Therefore, that we were not going to spend the step. Then, as we passed the step, they said we were going to lose against the blank vote. They said the left was going to beat us by win. They said we had no chance against the other option they created so that the votes of liberalism were not filtered. However, we get 17% and become the third force of the city. And then, I say, because there is also a part that has to do with luck. Because at the time of assuming, my anarcho-capitalist philosophy collided with the issue of charging a salary from taxes that are compulsively extracted, especially if I could also work on something else. That is, one can be a deputy, for example, and can work on something else, which clearly could give up the diet. And the theme was how he renounced the diet. Because, if I also distributed it by finger, I was doing similar things to those that politicians do. Or if I put some grandiloquent criteria. I don't know if they remember, but there were people who said how I had to donate the money. It was amazing. If that money was mine, I gave it to whom I wanted. What bothered me was to use the finger. And there, brilliantly, my sister came up with that we were raffled. Also the amount of things they said about the draws. How much is the value of a base data? I think they are paid like $3, something like that, right? Well, we had a base of 3 million people who scored. Of course, then there were 9 green sticks. Then they said we did that to sell the base. Then we had 3 keys. One the programmer, another my sister and another me. What did we do? We broke my key, which could not access that base. So we didn't do it for money. And the most rewarding of all is that, when we went to make the first draw in Mar del Plata, we did it on a staircase that there is a well-known hotel, and 10,000 people gathered. So my sister said, "You're going to be president." Okay, he succeeded. So what I mean is that they do not let them be intimidated by those who say it cannot be done. You have to go ahead. They advance, advance, advance. That is, look, the worst that can happen to them in life, and this is a personal reflection, and no longer bother them, is, it is better to regret having tried and err, than having to regret for not having tried. He is a Calvary, it is hell living with that, living repenting because they didn't try. It's as Borges said, I have committed the worst of sins, I was not happy. Then, it is much better to cry because they tried and went wrong, than the other case, because at least they tried. I have nothing more to tell you, except thank you very much. May God bless the Argentines, that the forces of heaven accompany us and long live freedom. Damn it.